Good evening, everyone. Welcome to C3. We're so glad that you could join us tonight as we continue through our Bible adventure. We're going to take a look at the book of Isaiah, specifically chapter 6, which is the story of the call of Isaiah. I hope you're keeping up with your Bible adventure reading. I know it's been really meaningful for me and the small group that I'm in, and I've heard really good things from other people. And tonight, as we talk about call, and Isaiah's call specifically, I thought it would be neat if we talked about the call that all of us have to do what God is calling us to do. So I invited some special guests, people that you probably know for sure. I got Pastor Sean with me, who is a deacon in the United Methodist Church, and I got Debbie Bates, our former parish nurse and our soon-to-be retired director of primetime adult care. And they're gonna join me in conversation discussing call. So welcome, and we're glad that you're here. And as we're talking, I want you to be thinking about your call. So as we get started, I'm going to just kind of throw it to Sean, because Sean is actually part of our board of ordained ministry in the United Methodist Church, and part of their job is to help people kind of figure out and discern their call to go into ministry. And that's what a lot of people associate call with. So Sean, tell us a little bit about what the Board of Ordained Ministry, or BOOM, does.
Yeah, so one of the most rewarding things that I've gotten to be a part of since I was commissioned, since I was ordained, is participating in the board of Ordained Ministry, or as it's known, BOOM, as well as the District Committee on Ministry for the Pittsburgh District, or DCOM. Those committees and groups are put together across the district and then across the conference to work with people who are discerning their call and coming up through the process to be ordained as pastors, or to be licensed as, on the district level, licensed local pastors. And it's we meet, BOOM meets a handful of times a year, and the DCOM, or District Committee, meets every month or so, and we have meetings and kind of appointments with individuals who are discerning their call, and we get to talk to them and have some conversation and help them to work through what they feel their call is. And on the we do have a little bit of questioning or interviewing for them. There's a little bit of healthy push to really help them work through where God is calling them to serve, how God is calling them to understand the nature of their ministry. And it's been I've loved just hearing stories of where God met them, and how God called them to consider and pursue a career in ministry, whether it's full-time career in ministry. A lot of our local pastors in our conference are dual career. They serve in a more secular job through the week, and then they lead churches through the week and on the weekends in worship. And I've loved just seeing the diversity of call. Because I remember myself going up through that process. I remember when I was in college was when I felt called into ministry. I had intended on pursuing physical therapy in college, and through my time with campus ministry, I remember a specific Thursday night meeting that the question was asked is, could you possibly see yourself serving as a career in ministry? And I can remember I could walk back to the exact moment and the exact spot physically where I stopped on my walk back to my dorm behind the Penn State Natatorium. There's a loading dock area with a bunch of pine trees lining the outside of it. And that moment is etched in my mind because I physically stopped myself walking, and I started to pray and said, is it a career in ministry that I'm being called to?
So good things can come from Penn State.
Yeah, thanks. But And so the process from there comes where I returned home a couple weeks after that, and the associate pastor at the time was John Shaver, appointed to Christ Church, and I got a chance to meet and talk with him, and he walked me through the first couple steps, and then I got a chance to meet with the district committee at that time. The district superintendent at that time was Don Scandrel.
Yep.
From then, I worked with them for a couple years. Then I did my interviews and my conversations with Boom, and to be able to serve on the other side of that has been so rewarding. Like I said, I've loved hearing stories.
Well, and I'm going to push you a little on your call, because you were on the elder track when I got here.
Yeah.
And followed John Shaver and Bill Beatty and then me. And I ended up working with you. And when I started working with you, you were on the track to be an elder.
Yeah.
Just like I am, and like Seth and Pastor Diane and everybody else. And through our conversation, God kind of led you away from being an elder and more into being a deacon. So can you tell everybody a little bit,
Yes.
so much how that worked and how you're in your sweet spot now?
Yeah. So I discovered in practice that call is a conversation. It is an engagement. It is to be called is to work with God. It's not delivered written in stone on a silver platter, or silver platter in stone, written in stone.
Yeah.
But it is an engagement. It's working with God to pursue that call. And so when I knew I felt called, I've always been confident that I knew I was called to serve the church. When I first started in the process, I kind of worked on the pattern and the model that I assumed that call would reflect, and that was more of an elder, of a more pastoral role pastor. And so I started off down that road, and I got into the practice of ministry. It was when we were working together. I was in seminary, and I had an opportunity to do field education here at Christ Church, and I got into the practice. I got my hands on different things, and I found how much I enjoyed working with media and communication and shaping the worship services through multimedia, through video, through the kind of the back support side. And that's where I found my direct passions for ministry. And God worked in those experiences to help me continue to shape and discern that call. Like I said, I've never felt that, or I've always been confident that I knew I was called to serve the church in some way. And it was through just, I set myself off on the path, and on that path, God continued to work with me and continued to shape my understanding of that call. And that's something that I think is an encouragement for everyone, is that we may not know exactly what our call is in full.
Yep.
But to just pursue it, to go off on the path, God will work with us along that path. God is not sending us off completely on our own, saying, "Here, this is your call. Now it's all on you." But this relationship, this continuing relationship and continuing conversation that God has with us as we work through and pursue and put our faith in that call, is where we continue to get shaped and continue to be accompanied and have God's presence help us in that journey.
Yeah, and the neat thing about this, and here's what I want you to really realize. Sure, calling often is associated with a deacon or with an elder or pastoral ministry, but God calls everybody. God doesn't just call people into ministry. God calls everybody to do what God calls them to do. And when God called Isaiah, the only requirement is what Isaiah responded in the end of verse 8 when he said, "Here am I, send me." So when God calls, in order for you to follow God's call, you got to be willing to go. And we have Debbie with us tonight because Debbie's not a pastor. Debbie does pastoral-like things. Debbie cares for people. Debbie does all those things, but Debbie hasn't walked through the Board of Ordained Ministry or the District Committee on Ministry, and yet Debbie's call is just as important and just as valid and just as exciting as our call is as full-time ministers in the United Methodist Church. So I asked Debbie to be here because, for those of you that don't know, Debbie's retiring, and Debbie is being called to the next stage of her life. And sidebar, we appreciate everything you've given to this church as our nurse and as our director of primetime adult care for the last 10 years. And we wish you nothing but the best. And the best part about it is we know you're not going anywhere because this is your church.
You got me.
So, but I want you to share with our folks and with us how you view call in your life, because it looks different for all of us, but we're all called.
It does, but some of the words you used really resonate with me. So I can tell you that years ago, I sat down one day and thought, you know what? God called me from a very young age. My favorite memories as a child are of being associated with Bridgeville Methodist Church, going to choir practice with my mother, going to Sunday school. I was one of these little nerdy kids that loved getting up at Dark 100 on Easter morning and going to sunrise with my grandma, me the only one with her. It was in my soul. And looking back on that, I understand that God called me into this whole life of being associated with church and of just growing and loving Jesus and trusting Jesus. So guys, you've heard this story before. I had lost my job with Blind and Vision Rehabilitation Services, where I was the director of the medical department. For years and years, I thought I was going to go under with the ship whenever it went under. And I was laid off in 2010. And I spent almost a year grieving, mourning, fighting with God, not understanding why I wasn't getting another nursing job. I would go on interviews and they would say, well, you're too qualified. Well, then hire me, I'll be great. But what happened was then Lois Slocum retired in the spring of 2011, as you guys remember, and she called me and she said, hey, do you want to look at my job? I said, oh, I guess. At that point, I was a little desperate. Well, fast forward, you all know that gave to me 9 years of pure pleasure and delight in serving with this church. Again, wasn't planning on going anywhere. And here's the big, big call. And everything builds upon itself. And as you mentioned, God meeting you, we have to be aware of where this is happening. We have to sit still for a minute and understand this.
You're a perfect example of his analogy that God doesn't carve your call in stone. It's a conversation that keeps
It's
happening.
a conversation, and things just keep happening to you. And you see where this was planned for this, and then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. So when Marianne Weber let everybody know that she was retiring from primetime, I didn't give it one thought, not a thought. I was happy at what I was doing. And one day I went downstairs, I had to talk to Marianne about something, I don't know, and PJ Wright was in her office, and I jokingly said to him, he was on her board at the time, are you here to apply for Marianne's job? And he said, no, are you? Why don't you apply for the job? And I said, no thanks, I'm good, I'm really good, guys, And we laughed. Well, between Marianne's office, which is now my office, over to my parish nurse office. So what does that take? 2 minutes? Mm-hmm. I went into my office, I sat down at my desk. I don't know what I was about to do, but I was hit with a brick, as I say, or a rock. God threw a rock at my head and said, you're going to take that job. And I said, no, sorry, not doing that. No.
Works out well when you tell God what you're not going to do, doesn't it?
Yeah, right, yeah. I'm good. And actually, do you remember that at one point, and I don't remember when this happened in the course of things, but you said to me, well, why don't you apply for that job? And at the time I thought, ooh, he's trying to get rid of me. What's happening? Oh, no. Anyway, it was profound. When you hear about stories, and you mostly hear about this with people going into ministry, that I was called, and I wonder what that feels like. Do you hear that voice? Do you hear a voice? What you hear or feel is a presence that you cannot shake. You can't shake it. No matter what happens, no matter what else you try to think about, your mind keeps going back to the issue that God wants you to address. And the issue, apparently, for me, was that I was the one that was going to be the next director of Primetime. Now, church, y'all know what happened last spring. I took the job. I started April 1st. Primetime had closed. Primetime had closed
Right.
March 13th.
Right.
And so I'm like, yeah, okay. So I'm going to take this job, and I have no idea what I'm doing, and now there's a pandemic. All right, I'll do it, whatever you say.
On the bright side of it, nobody could have had that job that had experience and known what to do.
Right.
That's the thing with the pandemic.
With the pandemic.
It was brand new
Yeah.
for everybody in every area. I don't care where you work, it was brand new. So maybe not having all that experience wasn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because
So, I went down there. I remember sitting at the desk looking at the walls. I was all by myself and thinking, what? Where do I go? What do I do? How do I do this? Well, things started unraveling quickly because I had to quickly write a COVID book about policies and procedures whenever Primetime would reopen again. I had to learn all about unemployment. I still wasn't learning about adult daycare, but I was learning things and doing things that absolutely had to be done in order for Primetime to succeed.
Yep.
And then, of course, on May 20th, when you all know my mom was involved in a terrible accident, I thought, okay, now Lord, you're having me do this job, and now you're having me deal with this situation. And I've decided that God really thinks that I am Superwoman. I'm like a grandma disguised. I'm really a grandma on the outside, but he must think I'm Superwoman on the inside here, because at this point in the journey, I have learned so much. I've done things that I never thought I could do before. It actually is a little bit of an ego feeder that you feel good about things that you never thought you could do. I was still able to be completely joined with my former staff, and all of my supporters couldn't have done it without any of that. The beauty of having this mission within a church has really made everything possible for Primetime, and that we're still existing today. But church, I'm here to tell you that if you're willing to understand some of those nudges. Now, again, it was a rock because it was a very quick 2-week battle, and I was tired of getting hit in the head when I finally acquiesced and said, okay, all right. It was one more example to me that God is real. God is real. He is with us every step of the way, the good and the bad, the good and the bad. And he gives us the opportunity to do with it what we will. He's not then making things smooth and easy and perfect, right, guys?
Amen to that.
Chris and I, for the whole year, we compared our challenges and the different things we had to do. He's dubbed himself the fall guy because he's had to deal with so many things where he was pushed up against the wall, as I was. But, we were able to be support for each other. And here we are. Here we are. I'm so blessed to have been given that opportunity.
And that thing about call, whether it's called into ministry, pastoral ministry, deacon ministry, whether it's called into adult daycare, called into taking care of family, whatever your call is, hopefully what you're hearing here is none of us are equipped to do what we're called to do. None of us.
Not in the beginning.
We're called. We say we'll go, and God equips us to do what we have to do. When you look back over your life and you realize the things that you've been able to accomplish, you realize you only accomplished them because God equipped you and gave you what you needed to do it. Whether that's in the church or whether that's in the world. God is the one that equips us to do, but we have to be willing to take that step and follow that call. And you say you got hit in the head with a rock, and you say you were walking and it hit you and you prayed. You know, God, like, I don't get it all the time either.
But that was when I recognized it. But as you pointed out, God is speaking to us through different people, through different circumstances, continually. And that's one of the questions on the committees that I'm serving. One of the questions that we ask candidates and upcoming leaders is, how have the people in your life affirmed your call? How have they spoken into? Because before we recognize that God is speaking to us through others, through circumstances, through situations, and when we look back on it, just as you look back on it and you see when PJ talked to you, when Chris had mentioned it to you, we can find and see and recognize the ways that God has put things in our way and in our lives to help us discern that call. Because some may say, well, I don't know what my call is. I've never felt particularly drawn to one thing or the other. Just take that moment to rest in and open our hearts and our eyes to the situations and people in our lives that may be speaking to us into that call.
Yeah, and I was the last one to figure out for me. Everybody else had figured out I was going into ministry before I did. You know, you said you were going to go to be a physical therapist. I was going to go to be an engineer. I'm a numbers guy. Like that was what I was going to do. And everybody's like, oh, I think you'd be a great pastor. I'm like, you're out of your mind. Like, you got to be kidding. And I kept ignoring it. Now, I grew up in the church like you. I was one of those church brats.
Yeah.
I was there when the doors were open. I was there. So I grew up in the church, and I volunteered in the youth group. And even after I graduated from high school, I came back as a leader. So I was connected to the church. I just wasn't going to be a pastor. I was going to go, have a really good career and do something out here and continue to volunteer at the church. And everybody kept saying, I think you should go into ministry. And I kept ignoring it, and I was sitting at a retreat for youth as a leader. And we're in this big room. There's like 600 or 700 people in this big room, and the guy's preaching, and I'm listening, and I'm watching our kids from afar because they're all spread out all over the place. And I'm just sitting there, and the guy at the end of his sermon was like, there's somebody here that's being called to ministry and is ignoring God. So I'm like, there's 600 people there. I wonder who he's talking to. And nobody raised their hand. Nobody listened. Nobody did anything. And he kept on going, and he came back to it again a second time. I was like, man, somebody really should start listening to what this guy is saying. Nobody responded at all. And then he came back a third time, and I was like, crap, it's me. And he said, whoever is fighting God just needs to quit fighting and come forward. So I walked forward, and God's like, if you're not going to get it, I'll make sure you get it.
You get it.
And so I'm up front basically saying, okay, I'm yours. Here I am. Send me, whatever that means, and I'm freshman in college in engineering and, whatever. So I'm working on all that. And Jen, who I will be married to for 24 years this September, was at that retreat as a youth. She was on the other side of the room. She had no idea I went forward. And here's how God's cool. As I'm up there giving my life to God to become a pastor, some woman from a church in West Virginia walks up to Jen, who's 16 at the time, and says, I feel like God is asking me to tell you something. I've never had this happen before. Do you mind if I share it with you? Jen had never met her. And Jen's 16, and she's like, okay. And the woman said, God is telling me to let you know that he's preparing you to be a pastor's wife, while I'm up front accepting a call to be a pastor. So Jen thought that was weird. She didn't know I was up front. When the whole thing's over, we ran into each other in the lobby afterwards, and I was like, how was your night? She goes, it was really weird. And she goes, how was yours? I said, really weird. I said, you know that guy he kept referring to as not following God to call into ministry? I said, that was me. And she burst into tears. And I'm like, why are you crying? And she goes, because some strange woman came up to me and said that they were preparing me to be a pastor's wife. And I knew you were going to be an engineer. I thought I was going to have to get rid of you. And basically, now I'm stuck with you for the rest of your life. So that's how the call works. Like, God does things that we can't ever possibly imagine.
Well, and he puts people in our lives, again, if we are willing to believe it.
Yep.
My husband was so supportive of this whole thing. I don't know if there's another man on this world that could have supported me through this last year like he did, and the rest of my family.
Yep.
And, but we have, some of that you have to intentionally do. You have to you have to choose who you want to be in your life, because you want these people to also be vessels for listening to God and supporting your community wherever it is. And so I have all those kind of people in my life. I've purposefully surrounded myself with people who had the same values. We talk about this at home all the time. Core values.
Yep.
The core values. And then you're going to be able to feel supported and validated in what you're doing, even though it might be uncomfortable, it might be difficult, it might make you want to take the bridge, which I tried to take several times this past year.
Yep.
You with me.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to hold hands together and just jump.
Right.
But we didn't, because we were constantly renewed.
Yep.
And given the tools and whatever we needed to understand in our brain, how to get through this last year. How to get through this little tiny situation in our life called the pandemic that we had no idea how to deal with. And yet it was all part of God's plan for us.
So hopefully you can see how God works through a call. There's 3 distinctly different stories, but yet they're a lot alike. And you heard about Isaiah's call this past weekend in worship. You also have a call from God, and you too have a call story. So take time to think about what God has called you to do. It may be ministry. You may end up sitting in front of Sean at DCOM and boom, and go into full-time ministry. It may be to let God use you where you are as a CPA or as an engineer or as a doctor or as a lawyer or as a janitor or a teacher or whatever. All of them are calls. Just take some time to kind of say, okay, God, where do you want me to go next? And appreciate who God puts in your path to confirm what God has called you to do. If you have any questions, come see us. And talk to anybody, because lots of people have calls, and we would be glad to not only share our call with you, but to hear your call and help you discern what God is calling you to do.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that we can do as leaders in the church, as just disciples together, is to work with each other and pose the question. Like your experience at that youth conference, that presenter, that leader, that speaker said, put it out that there is someone here that is being called to ministry. So when I came up through the youth group here, I had a smaller senior class that I graduated with. There were like 6 or 7 of us, and 3 out of those 6 or 7 people that graduated in youth group with me are currently serving in full-time ministry roles. One in a youth ministry role, one in a campus ministry role. And I think there was, at one point, whether we recognize it or not, we all were posed the question of do you see yourself serving in ministry? And just asking that question is so important. Because the reality is that in our church, there are future leaders in the church right now.
Yep.
Whether it's in the youth group, whether it's across the church, whether that's going to be in a full-time ministry role, whether that's taking on a mission and a ministry like Prime Time and getting engaged with that. There are people that in our church that God is preparing to respond to a call. And I'll say when in DCOM, it does. We talk with a lot. Most of the people we talk with are second career.
Yep.
That they are responding to a call. They're not right out of college. They're not still in high school. Most of them have lived and journeyed along with God for years, some many years, and they're responding to their call. And I love hearing the stories of where God met them, because God is speaking and calling each and every one of us to a ministry, whether it's in full-time ministry or it's the ministry of your family, of your life, of your career. God has that call for each and every one of us.
God is always asking the question, whom shall I send and who's going to go? My question for all of you tonight is, are you ready to say, here I am, send me? That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. Children, go where I send thee.
That's right. Let's pray. Lord, we are grateful for the call that you've given to each and every one of us. Help us to continue to be faithful to that call. Help us to listen to that call. And help us to go where you want us to go, knowing even if we're not equipped on our own, you will equip us. I thank you for Sean. I thank you for Debbie. I thank you for the calls you've given to them. And I thank you for all of the people that are part of this church who live into your call every single day. Continue to equip all of us to become who you want us to be. We ask all this in your Son's name. Amen. Well, thanks for joining us tonight for C3. So glad that you were with us. Hope you have a great night, a great week. We will see you in worship this coming weekend. And don't forget, follow the call that God has given to you. Have a great night. God bless.